So we thought that it might be important for the Wharton School to try to figure out what's going on with this football labor situation, and we're fortunate at Wharton to have two leading experts in the two fields that bring this problem to light. Janice Balache, an expert in labor law, and Andrew Brandt, an expert in sports law. So we're about a month into this work stoppage highlighted by a lockout, and they're currently in the midst of court-mandated mediation. Now, Andrew, if you could just, for a moment, give us the background on the story. And where we want to go is to let Janice tell us what happens in the outside sports world, right, and maybe get some insight as to how this thing may play out. So just a little background on how we got where we are.
Quick nutshell, this deal was supposed to go through 2013. It was a collective bargaining agreement negotiated in 2006, but the owners had an opt-out, which they voted 32-0 unanimously to get out of this deal. They didn't like the deal. So in May 2008, they voted, we're out. We're going to end it 2 years early in March of 2011 versus 2013. So that brings us up to the present, and sporadic and inconsistent negotiations over the last 2 years led to this culmination on March 11th, where both sides negotiated and there was an offer and they had deep-seated negotiations. But at the end of the day, the union chose to dissolve as a union and decertify, and their strategy was, let's become a non-union and let's take this to court rather than bargaining, using a history that showed more gains made in litigation rather than negotiation. So that's where we've been, and then they filed the lawsuit, which is now called Brady v. NFL, a lot of high-name plaintiffs suing the NFL for antitrust violations. And as we know, now we're not in labor negotiations, we're in court, so it's an antitrust lawsuit. And we're in a phase now where the first effort by the players is for the NFL to lift the lockout. The NFL imposed the lockout in response to this. No NFL business, no signings, no trades. All they can do is draft in the end of April. They'll do that, but they can't sign them, so they'll sit on their hands. So where we are now is we're waiting for Judge Nelson, who is the judge assigned this case, to rule whether to lift the lockout or not and open it for business. Even if she rules for the players, which we can talk about, I think she will, there is an appeals process, and it's likely she won't lift and open the NFL for business until after the appeals. So we're in this, what I call, courtroom football for a while.
Okay, so let's try to get a little clarity, a little bit of grasp of if the sports world's different from the rest of the world. Now, Janice, how typical is it for, I don't know, steel workers or auto workers for them to actually let a collective bargaining agreement run its course to actually end?
Oh, that's common. I mean, it's common for an agreement to come to an end and for bargaining to start. And sometimes there's a question of, have you reached a deadlock? Because technically, you're not allowed to resort to economic weapons until you've reached impasse, is the technical phrase, but a deadlock. What's odd here, I'm just saying, there's a few things that just jump at me. It's very long collective agreement. Right. Collective agreements are normally only 3 years in length. So this one was real long, although having an opening clause would be common if you have such a long one. But when they announced that they were going to opt for their ability to bring it to an end, this is the league, the fact that bargaining was sort of sporadic and not very intense is unusual. That's unusual. And the final thing that was very unusual is the lockout technique here is being used differently. Normally in industry where you have lockouts, it's because the employer doesn't want the workers to be able to determine when production stops. It would be very inconvenient. So the employer almost wants to control the timing of that. But here it's being used as a tactic. It's clear.
Yeah, Andrew, why don't you walk through a little the timing with the lockout decertification effort for the injunction, and then Janice, maybe you can react to the timing of those pieces.
This all really happened in a little 2-day span here. Negotiations were supposed to end, the CBA expired March 4th. They extended it a week, so they had till March 11th. And it was under a mediation situation with George Cohn of the FCMS in Washington. But March 11th, once they couldn't agree on a new CBA, at 5 p.m. or whenever it was, the NFLPA filed its papers with a judge overseeing the CBA, a judge in Minnesota named David Doty, to say we dissolve as a union. We've gone from a union to a non-union trade association. That's what they were. And that next day, March 12th, I believe at midnight, the NFL locked out the players. And on that same day, the NFLPA, the players now, filed a lawsuit called Brady v. NFL against the NFL. So all these machinations went on in 2 days. And maybe I could lead to a question to you. In a context outside of sports, is there any occurrences of these decertifications? Or is this strictly a tactic for sports unions?
No, this is really fascinating to me. There are decertifications, but they're true decertifications.
Not just tactics.
Not just tactics. And this wasn't even technically a decertification. I'll tell you why. In a real decertification, as the CBA is nearing expiration, there's a window of opportunity where disgruntled members have to get enough signatures on a petition. And they go to the National Labor Relations Board and we say, we don't want this union anymore. And there's an election, an election to decertify the union.
Right.
That's the way it would occur. So here, they never went to the National Labor Relations Boards. It wasn't a decertification. It's the players saying, we do no longer authorize this union to be our bargaining representative. Now that's the theory of labor law, that the union is the authorized bargaining agent.
Correct.
And so the players are saying, we don't authorize you. Okay, so you've no longer authorized the union to be your bargaining agent. Well then, do the players without a bargaining agent, are they still some sort of a collective? Can they agree? Who are they bargaining? Who is the league bargaining with if the union's no longer authorized? That's my first big question.
My understanding is that would be lawyers only right now.
Right.
It's part of a litigation settlement rather than a...
And they're representing the players collectively, though.
Correct.
So the players collectively...
Class counsel.
Okay.
That's
there's no case like this ever. I mean, there just isn't. And it'll be very interesting to say, well, you can't get to impasse in 24 hours or less. I mean, I've never heard of that. That would be impossible if they were saying this was an economic weapon from the players' side. So the players have to say, this is not an economic weapon. This is just a question of who we're authorizing to represent us in negotiations.
Well, just an add-on to that, you mentioned the National Labor Relations Board. The owners did file a claim with the NLRB saying it's an unfair labor practice for them to go from collective bargaining to litigation in a matter of minutes. And they're asking the judge to defer to the NLRB, which, as I understand it, maybe you can clarify, could take months, even years, for the NLRB to first make their determination on whether the union is still a union so that they can't be in antitrust court. So this is sort of ongoing as well. My sense is that she'll take the case and not defer to the NLRB, but what would be your sense of that?
On this one, I'm not sure about that because the NLRB has the responsibility under the statute to determine what's called a question of representation. That's outright. Section 9 of the statute says that's the job of the NLRB, and there is a question of representation here. Firstly, who represents these players? Do they wish to be represented as a collective for the purposes of collective bargaining, and if so, by whom? So that does have to be decided.
Yeah.
If they, in my mind, I don't know a case like this, so I'm coming out with a big
It's unique.
if.
It's truly unique.
If they did want to be represented as a collective by certain lawyers, and somehow the lawyers are authorized to sign for the collective, then I would think that the league is still in a bargaining situation, and therefore the lockout is a permissible weapon, although whether they could wield it so fast is another question.
Well, Janice, to carry it a step further, part of the accusation, I mean, this is the more informal phrasing, is the league is saying the decertification is a sham. And I guess the counter to that, well, if you think it's a sham, is it possible for any party to compel the players to be represented by a union? I mean, that's kind of the the defense in some ways the former union is putting out there. You can't make us be a union if we don't want to be. Is there any kind of precedent out there that would say you can make someone be a union?
But you're right. It's an odd argument, and the argument I think the league would have to make is that the union is engaged, and the players, through their union, are engaging in bad faith bargaining. That this is bad faith bargaining, this pattern of behavior. And that is a question for the National Labor Relations Board, not for the court.
So it's even though you've claimed to decertify, we don't think you have. We think this is just bargaining in bad faith.
That's right. I'd be curious to know who's paying the lawyers.
On which side?
For the players.
For the players.
Here we have this group of players acting as a collective, and suddenly there's lawyers there. Who's paying them? That's one of the first questions.
That would be an NFLPA fund. NFLPA now a trade association.
Well, you don't have to be called a union. I mean, people here call it a union, but you could be called the ABC Club, and you are representing people. That's what a union is. The union is the bargaining agent for a group of persons working. Right. So whatever name you're putting on it is unimportant. If the players decided to quote unquote decertify or deauthorize, whatever, and they're still acting as a collective, as a tactic in bargaining, then the question becomes whether that tactic is a lawful tactic. Now, there's no case on that. But I just have to say, in collective bargaining, the phrase that comes up in cases is economic weapons, industrial, combat. I mean, the phraseology is fierce. So it's not like you have to be Mr. Nice Guy sitting and talking. The question is it a permissible weapon? And I don't know a case on that.
Okay, well, you've thoroughly convinced us. There is a lot that is a first impression in this, which is what everyone's been thinking, but there hasn't been a whole lot of confirmation that there aren't other pieces out there like that. So we got this frame, and Andrew, you mentioned that you do have some thoughts on where you think the judge will rule in this initial part of the case. Why don't you tell us where you think this might go in this first ruling, and then we'll have some more conversation from there.
Yeah, on April 6th, she heard arguments from both sides, and she being Judge Nelson, the District Court of Minnesota, she was much more strident and much more aggressive in her questioning of the owners' lawyers. We can call them the NFL owners, the same group. And, excuse me, a guy named David Boyes is representing them. And she was asking a lot of tough questions. He was trying to establish this jurisdictional base that it shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here. We should be in front of the National Labor Relations Board, or according to something called the Norris-LaGuardia Act, they shouldn't even be allowed to do this. So he made these arguments. She fought back, and that's why I mentioned earlier, I think she wants the case rather than defer to the NLRB. And she asked a question which I think showed her hand. She said to the owner's lawyer, so if I don't lift this lockout, somewhere paraphrasing, this could go on forever. And when she said that, I thought, okay, I see where this is going. She's probably going to grant the injunction because she sees some real potential irreparable harm if this goes on for potentially years. Obviously, no one thinks it will, but the legal potential would allow it to go on for a long time. So my sense is probably sometime this week, she'll rule for the players in this round. The NFL will immediately appeal to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is known, again, this is kind of industry talk, a more pro-business, a more pro-ownership type of view, and maybe the NFL thinks it can take its chances better in appellate court. But my initial reaction is she'll rule for the players, grant the injunction to lift the lockout and open the NFL for business. However, I think business won't open until the appeals process is done. So we'll probably be in this lockout a few more weeks, at the minimum.
At this initial ruling, if she rules in favor of the players, signings and things could occur, but you don't think from a business standpoint it makes sense?
I think it would create a lot of chaos. She could, what she's ordered in the meantime is this mediation. My sense was that if she said, I'm lifting the lockout for the players pending appeal, if the owners didn't engage in this good faith mediation, she'd say, hey, open for business right now. But since they seem to be serious about this mediation, my sense is she will hold it for appeal. So technically the players will win this round, but in my estimation, but NFL lockout won't be lifted until it hits the appeal process with the 8th Circuit. And again, the timing, who knows? That could be weeks, even months.
It'll probably go, it'll be expedited, so.
Can they do that?
Yeah, they can ask for an expedited appeal, and this is a highly watched case, so. Because you can drag your feet if actually you want it a bit slower too. It depends which
Right.
side wants to do what.
Now, just broadly, Janice, this interplay between labor and being governed by the NLRB and having your activities with a federal mediator and that sort of thing versus lawsuits versus being in court and the antitrust weapon. Is this a common occurrence as labor disputes progress?
Once again, no. Generally, in private sector companies that are subject to the National Labor Relations Act, they would prefer to go through the National Labor Relations Board and at the speed they wish to go, which is
Right.
another issue about how fast or slowly they wish to go. But being in mediation is extremely common. In fact, I'm curious why they didn't ask for mediation themselves. In 1947, Congress separately created the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service to say, if you are to stave off strikes and lockouts, to say if you are in a situation where a strike or lockout is likely, which is at the end of a CBA, then you can ask for a federal mediator who, and this is free, the taxpayer actually pays for this, and will send you an experienced person. So the fact that they went to lockout right away, for instance, without, that's just this whole question of whether an impasse ever occurred. If you go that route, is an interesting issue, because I don't think they may have a difficult time showing that an impasse occurred
Right.
before they used the lockout, which is perhaps why the NFL is staying away from the board right now. They might think their posture isn't very good either.
One thing on mediation, there have been 2 rounds. So you mentioned the FCMS. They did go through that on a voluntary basis for 18 days prior to March 11th. Here's the feeling. The feeling from the NFL is the NFLPA was never serious. They just wanted to get to decertification and litigation. The feeling of the NFLPA is the NFL was never serious. They just wanted to get to lockout. So then we have the April 6th hearing, and she makes a comment at the end of the hearings, like, I'll rule in a couple weeks, you guys should talk. And then each side comes out with, yeah, we want to talk, but we want to talk. The NFL says we want to talk as bargaining because they're still a union. The NFLPA says, well, we want to talk, they can talk to our lawyers. So then she pulls them back into a conference call and says, hey, we're doing judge-ordered, I guess, mediation. She has a colleague that's supervising mediation. And everyone asks, is that real? Is that having any effect? And my sense, and you can comment, is while she's holding that ruling, I don't think either side's really going to make much of a way of concessions. Right?
First of all, 18 days of being in mediation is modest. Sometimes this goes on for months. And the theory behind it is that, to use a phrase of a famous Wharton professor many years ago, George Taylor, the motive power for settlement, like what makes people settle, and it's economic reality. So that's, by the way, why you allow people to use economic weapons in a free market situation, is you think one of them is going to say, it's too much pain, I'm going to settle. We're far away from that because we're far away from the beginning of the season. So why should anybody be in a hurry to settle right now? I look at this and say this is normal behavior. If anything, both parties have decided to try to use the courts to circumvent the normal free market approach to let's try to negotiate, put pressure on each other, see which one gives in first. That's the norm. They're trying to skirt around it by using the courts.
It's interesting when we don't know, and you and I have talked about this, when those dates are that the economic reality hits.
Yes,
I mean,
right.
we're in April, the season starts in September. Sometime between now and then, I believe both of them in the back of their mind have their deadlines.
Yeah.
We just don't know what that is. I mean, we have the draft. That's obviously not been a deadline. Training camps may start in late July. Maybe that's a deadline. But we just don't know what the real economic reality is. The one issue that I always talk about is owners have more resources, therefore in a time test battle the players are not as fortified because they're going to start missing their money. And you have 1,900 players versus 32 owners, there are going to be some cracks. Maybe not soon, but probably summertime when people are looking for money. So that's something to watch out for as well.
That's what I think would happen.
And that would be some of the benefit to the players, at least, in a strange kind of way, of the injunction being granted in this lockout. That if at some point business has to continue, the benefit for players is if they need to work, they'll be able to work. The negative is the cracks will get bigger and bigger because more players may come out.
And until we get a CBA, even if we lift the lockout, we have football again, it's going to be kind of a temporary, non-feel-good type of football.
Oh, well, but I was
It'll
say,
be
because I was
temporary
thinking
rules.
with terms and conditions, sometimes there's two things that can happen if you've had an impasse. One, there's two things. One is the owners can say, the league's going to say, we'll just continue the contract as we bargain. The other is, no, there is no collective agreement. If you want to play, we're willing, business is open, and this is what we're going to pay you. You can't have people play without being paid, so something has to happen come the summer or September.
But they have to be careful not to be too restrictive in if they open, because there's this pending antitrust lawsuit as well.
I agree.
So there are damages.
Well, that probably would have to be settled before then.
Yeah, my sense is they'd
probably
put back the rules
Yeah.
they played under in 2010.
The other thing that I'm still curious if anyone is going to go to the board and say this is unlawful. For instance, the lawyers for the players, I suppose, can go and file a charge saying that the lockout, that an impasse had not been reached. Or the league could go and say the whole deauthorization is a violation of the duty to bargain in good faith, unfair tactic. One of the other side, they can ask for an expedited hearing also.
Well,
they have a couple months.
That's been the whole concern with the board. It's the stated big negative is the timing, that it takes them a long time.
Historically it does, but one reason why it takes a long time is you have to go to a hearing at the regional level. So, but they would give this priority. The board's not busy right now. And then, I'm serious, so this is like a priority case. And you're going to have only lawyers arguing. You can do it as fast as you can a court case. And that's at the regional level. And then it goes to Washington. Once again, you only have 5 people who sit in a room and read with the written materials. That's all there is. So it could be faster if both sides want to go fast. But it isn't like a normal, you hear of these cases that last for years, but they're organizing campaigns and one side's dragging its feet and they're arguing about issues. If they're just arguing the legal issues, it could be fast.
Well, today, April 19th, they're releasing the NFL schedule, which is interesting. So they're acting like business as usual, at least in terms of the schedule, and they want that promoted out there while this all negative publicity is around. They're going to get that out there. But I think let's not lose sight of the main thing here. I don't think we're ever going to have a trial. I don't think we're ever going to see Tom Brady and Peyton Manning being cross-examined in a courtroom. This is all about leverage. So the owners are just trying to get a better deal. The players are just trying to get a better deal. And all these little things we talk about are jockeying for position for the home stretch.
But I would add someplace where it could take time. I just realized. If the league goes to and files the complaint of bad faith bargaining.
Which they have.
Okay. Then, depending on how the players want to proceed, there might be an investigation of what exactly was the mechanism whereby the players decided that the NLPA is not their union, but these lawyers are representing them collectively. Now, there could be some investigation about exactly how was this done and what was said, and that would be important because it would have to be determining was this as a basis for bad faith bargaining, almost a determination of what was their tactic and how was it authorized.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Then let me see if you guys have any questions for each other, and then we'll close out. And I'm not sure that I have a full grasp on how the decertification proceeded. So you can correct me, Andrew, if you know better than I do. The players did actually take a vote some period of time before that final fateful weekend when the CBA ran out, basically giving their approval for decertification if this moment came, if the CBA expired. And this is basically embedded in a problem or a solution that was put into the last collective bargaining agreement that said that if the union does not decertify before the collective bargaining agreement ends, they promise not to decertify until 6 months later. And this was very, again, I don't know if there's any precedent for this kind of thinking or not, but this was related to the last round of litigation where decertification was the answer for the antitrust laws to become the weapon for the union. And then this is where I get a little murkier is there was some, I heard some commentary that there was actually a follow-up vote taken to confirm that this was the players' wish, and this took place sometime around the fateful weekend.
Right. I think throughout the fall, 2010, starting with like opening day, DeMaurice Smith, the head of the NFLPA, went around to each and every of the 32 teams and took these decertification votes. I mean, he has the meetings scheduled anyway. They talk about benefits. They talk about their annual meetings with the teams. But one of the things they did was hand out decertification votes. And I think most teams, if not all, were unanimous. And the player rep for the team would explain it further, and they'd vote. And everybody was authorizing this to happen. And then, as you said, it came down to the middle of March when they were actually going to do it, and they got that reauthorization from the players. Now, if you're asking me if every of the 1,900 players knew what they were doing, of course not. You know, I've been in those meetings with the Packers, and I've seen how, you know, they see their teammates signing something, they'll sign something. So it was a feeling that, as we've said, this is a way we can use an economic weapon. Right. And the players said, that sounds cool, you know. If we just sign this, you know, we have that weapon. That's not saying we're going to use it, but we have it. And that's what went on.
So to me, it's strong. In my view of listening to this recital, that's evidence that it most definitely was a tactic. It is quite normal in some unions to go, the United Auto Workers does this. They go out months ahead of time and say, if it comes to such and such, do you authorize the union to call a strike?
Right.
And they have to do it ahead of time because you never know what's going to happen at the 11th hour. Sure. So that looks like the same thing here. Now, the bizarre part is that the union's saying, by the way, at the 11th hour, do you authorize who to say we're deauthorized? I guess you're authorizing the union to stand up and say we're deauthorized? I mean, it's very strange. It is a tactic. So it's going to clearly become a tactic, and the legality of that tactic would be what the National Labor Relations Board would have to do.
But is it a legal tactic? I mean, I guess that's the question.
Right.
Can you? The league says you can't go from collective bargaining to antitrust litigation in a matter of minutes. But is there a law saying you can't? I guess that's the question.
Well, the antitrust exemption is so unusual anyway, the way it operates in professional sports. Technically, I think you could. There's certainly no case on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to have the United Auto Workers decertifying to get to litigation.
That's right. Yeah, right? That's what's it's unusual. I was trying to think.
It's a sports tactic.
Yeah, there's and something that's odd. This is what's odd about sports. There are situations that are called multi-employer bargaining. It happens all over the United States, often in construction. Let's say you have electricians in a region, and the electricians union signs an agreement with many different small companies, electrical contractors, and it's one agreement. Okay. Well, if the electricians decertified the union, technically what would happen, of course, is each electrical contractor would bargain with electricians, with the union,
right,
or with electricians. Here, you really can't have clubs individually bargaining that easily. I mean, it would change the whole nature of professional football because of the way the league interacts with the clubs. And right now, they're protected by the antitrust exemption.
Well, we've gotten quite a bit of clarity here, quite a bit of insight on what is different about sport. Yeah. Let me see if either one of you have a final question or comment.
Having heard us, how do you think this will end?
I'm actually in favor of it going to the board because I think this is truly an issue of collective bargaining and people trying to apply economic weapons and what's allowed and what's not. And that's the expertise of the board, not the court. That's my view.
Spoken like a true labor lawyer.
And I think it'll resolve in a new collective bargaining agreement where the union reforms as a union, the former union reforms as a union, as they did 20 years ago in the Reggie White case. And Just the thing I have a hard time is figuring out when that is.
Yes, yeah.
Sometime between late May and early September. I don't know when, but it'll happen.
It'll happen.
Well, we should have part 2 of this conversation sometime before then.
Right.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for talking to you.
Thank you.